Thank you. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Let's talk a little bit about open source capitalism. Quickly about myself first. So I'm Prometheus. I've been around in the space quite a long time, especially in DeFi. In 2017, I joined the Maker Foundation to build the multi-collateral version of the DAI stablecoin. I was then later part of the radical decentralization experiment that happened at Maker when the Maker Foundation dissolved and the MakerDAO really took off. And until this day, I'm working on decentralization and decentralized operations at Powerhouse, the Sky spinoff that was founded in 2023. So why open source capitalism? Well, in case you hadn't noticed, capitalism is the most powerful economic system that has ever existed. Capitalism has created untold productivity, wealth, and ultimately power for those that have embraced it. End of the last century, capitalism gave birth to big tech, which accelerated it even more. There is only one problem. Capitalism and big tech have been less and less aligned with the common good. I don't think that is a very controversial point, definitely not in this room. But yeah, we know this because there is the so-called tragedy of the commons, which is becoming more and more apparent with the climate crisis and things like biodiversity crisis and the other negative externalities that are known to be effects of capitalism. There is an extreme concentration of power and wealth that was created by capitalism. We already had seen this with the robber barons, but today it seems that the most wealthy individuals more or less directly control even the more powerful or the most powerful political positions in the world. And what is really happening is that this aggressive growth of capitalism is starting to stress test the limits of our democracies. This is, for example, apparent when we look at the impact of social media and the disinformation that can disrupt democracies. And this is becoming more and more a problem. And with AI, this will become an even greater problem pretty soon. So capitalism is an unstoppable force, but it is out of balance. So what can we do? Capitalism needs a more level playing field, a more open economy, one where doing the right thing becomes a little bit more profitable again. So this is where open source capitalism comes in. Open source capitalism is the idea that if we can take the very powerful force of capitalism, big tech, and free markets, and if we can combine that with purpose-driven, open network organizations, that we can actually see a booming of the commons as never seen before. So this is about a redemocratization of capitalism. It is capitalism for the many, not just a few. But isn't that what Ethereum and DeFi and DAOs are supposed to be about anyway? Well, Ethereum, unfortunately, has failed to create an ecosystem that really goes beyond speculative assets and speculative bubbles. In fact, I saw a lot of tweeting lately about how devastatingly bad it is for the industry that it is seen as just a casino from the outside. That is a very unfortunate outcome, but that is the reality today. But, well, DeFi is promising because, speaking about speculative bubbles, what is less speculative than a stablecoin? And isn't the most attractive thing for real businesses, for example, a permissionless loan on chain? Well, fortunately, that's not how it turned out. DeFi 2 has failed to grow outside of the speculative bubble because the on-chain loans are actually used to lever up on the speculative assets, And you can do more of that if you have stable coins to flee to when there is a bear market. And what about DAOs? Well, DAOs unfortunately also have failed to live up to their original promise. This is an exchange from not too long ago at DEF CON between Lefteris, who gave a very critical talk of DAOs, and Vitalik. And we see the conclusion there, that DAOs, as long-lasting things that provide a service, have not been done right. So how can we do this right? What is the problem? What is the missing ingredient here? So this brings me back to 2021 when we did the radical decentralization experiment at MakerDAO. I've seen this firsthand. At the very beginning, it looked very promising. The DAO took off. It grew to the size of about 20 core units. But then after 2 years, it turned out that it was really not sustainable, and the experiment was essentially dialed back. So why is that? Why do DAOs not scale? Why does an open and decentralized Amazon, Uber, Airbnb not exist? Should that not be possible? Because these are all networks. So we don't have time to dive into all the details, but watching this from close by, our conclusion was that coordination failure at DAOs ultimately leads to uncompetitive outcomes. And I think you will recognize a number of these points in the list. DAOs can't deliver complex integrated user experiences that are needed for platforms such as Airbnb and others of that size. They fail to reach consensus about direction and goals. And even if they do, they fail to plan and execute at scale. And most ironically, because everything happens in the open, because DAOs are so chaotic, there is an incredible lack of transparency. There is, as a result, a lack of accountability, and there is a lack of sustainability. This is the problem with DAOs. So, decentralization is important, but decentralization is not enough. DAOs need to beat the tyranny of structurelessness. DAOs need to learn how to organize around common goals. It really is that simple. So this is a clear case of do not panic, organize. So the missing ingredient, in other words, is organizational structure. Scalable network organizations is the concept that we have developed at Powerhouse that we hope will help to bring that structure together with other projects. So scalable network organizations, you could say, are based on the principles of open-source capitalism. So let's have a look at 4 principles for equipping open source with capitalism's force. The first principle is coordination through a marketplace platform, essentially taking lessons from Airbnb and Uber. This one, I think, is really, really obvious. If you think about it, how is it that the dominant way of building open source software is not on open collaborative platforms where we have our open source roadmaps and the builders can be a part of a marketplace that are building out these roadmaps? Not just the developers. Git and GitHub, they're good examples of collaboration platforms that work, but for only technical profiles. We need something that goes broader, that has, for example, product managers, designers, and other professionals that can help build these platforms, such as the Airbnbs and the Ubers of the world. So the idea is to create a builder platform with open source roadmaps. This is the ultimate coordination mechanism for a distributed workforce. It has, as Uber, for example, shows, the potential to automate processes, capture best practices, and capture organizational knowledge. I think you've all been in the situation where you saw a DAO going through a learning experience, and then some person left, and then some other person joined, and then the exact same mistakes were repeated. And yeah, the organization as a whole wasn't able to capture that knowledge and experience. This is what these platforms can help with. They can also help to create transparency in spending and delivery. They can create efficiency through scale and competition, and they can create incentive alignment with tokens and profit shares. That we know very much in crypto. Imagine a platform where it would be as easy for a contributor to get onboarded to a DAO as it is to create or to become a host at Airbnb. How many more would then flock to our building platforms and help us in building open source software for the commons? Principle number 2, profits before distribution. We have seen today a number of very interesting discussions, and there are very many projects in the space who are looking at the difficult issue of, as was discussed, impact and distribution. When we want to incentivize open source projects, we need to know what their impact is and what a good distribution mechanism is to do retroactive funding. But before we do the retroactive funding, there actually has to be a source of funding and revenue. So what we have been looking at is how to embed that into the structure of an open network organization. So the idea is pretty simple. We need to make our businesses, the end user platforms, a part of the open network. So the structure that we've been working on are the so-called revenue generating hubs. The revenue generating hubs, they take the open source software from the network and they offer it to the end users and make a profit doing that. Very simply, they then pay a profit share back to the network as systematic retroactive funding. We've heard in the discussion just before me that it is incredibly important to create a solid expectation that there will indeed be retroactive funding. The best guarantee you can give is to actually include the business that will generate that revenue into your network. So what is in it for the builders? I think that one is pretty obvious. Profit shares are systematic, retroactive funding. But also, the business can take care of the relationship with the end user and the customer. So no hassle with end user terms, SLA, support, and so on. Typical aspects that open source builders aren't always interested in doing themselves. The builders also get to build really user-friendly software that is really useful and that gets used by actual users. And this is sometimes in the open source world a problem. So if you inject that market signal into the production process, then it leads to better open source software as well that works better for end users. And then, of course, an organization like that is perfect for builders to build up reputation and experience for future projects as well. What is in it for the revenue generating hub? Because remember, we are talking about open source software. Cannot every business just take the software and not pay the profit share? That is true, but the revenue generating hub gets a number of advantages that make it really interesting to become a part of the network. First of all, the revenue generating hub gets to drive the priorities of the roadmap. They are closest to the user, so they know what the features are that are needed to reach that product market fit. And the network takes care of the execution, the implementation, the rollout, everything that the business typically can stumble on because of the complexities that are involved. The business, if it is not the only one in the network, it can also share its resources with these other complementary businesses. For example, infrastructure improvements, open source work on that might benefit many businesses. And so the businesses, they get software that gets automatically updated and improved, even if they don't necessarily pay for it themselves. And then last but not least, these businesses can also use the official IP assets and branding of the network. Think, for example, about the domain name. Where are you going to go as a user? to a business that seems to be a separate business, or do you want to go to the people that actually built this thing? Like clearly that kind of confidence would give the business a competitive advantage. Principle number 3 is about open source licensing, maximizing value capture of the network, the importance of commercial licensing in an open source world. So a network survival it's a pretty mechanical thing. It actually depends on the balance of 2 parameters. So if we look at the total value that gets captured by the network, which determines if it will grow or shrink or stay the same size or ultimately prosper or die, is really just 2 things. It is the size of the network, which depends on how open and inviting and attractive it is, and it is the reciprocation rate of its members. If you have a really big network, but none of your members, none of your contributors, none of your users reciprocate anything to the network, then it's not going to last. On the other hand, if you have a rather small network with high reciprocation rates, you're building a very resilient structure that can grow later on and stay for the long run. So the interesting thing is that the 2 most popular open source license groups are actually not optimized for this. There are two typical open source licenses that are considered. One are permissive open source licenses such as MIT, Apache license, and so on. That one is great for openness. There are no strings attached. It has maximum network effect. Everyone can use it. The software will be very viral. But there is no reciprocation pressure whatsoever. So this software that gets distributed among all its users, it might really never have any value that flows back to the network. And that can be a problem. This is actually a good license if you are big tech and you have an infinite war chest that you can pour into it, and you use the open source software as viral marketing. But maybe if you're smaller, you're considering, for example, AGPL or GPL, the strong copyleft open source licenses. The benefit there is that they have very strong reciprocation pressure, but they're too restrictive for most businesses. In fact, businesses typically assume that the software is toxic. They don't touch it. So what is the solution here? Well, it's actually pretty simple. You don't have to just pick one license. You can offer 2 separate independent licenses. A strong copyleft license for your users and builders, who will then reciprocate with code when they make changes, and a commercial license for businesses that want to use your software but not open source their changes. And they are then reciprocating with the money from the licenses. Make the network stronger by opening up this avenue. Then, the final principle, making open source investable. It is, if we can attract that investment, that we're really igniting the booster rocket of capitalism. Can you refresh the... This is not the last version. No, this is not the last version. The slide's missing. Slides. I will keep talking, but maybe we get to see the slide. But let's recap what we already have. We just discussed a way of capturing as much value as possible from the network. We have a way of building profitable businesses that generate revenue as a part of our network, and we have a way of distributing the profits to the builders and potential other candidates. We also have a way of efficient execution and coordination with a marketplace platform. That to me sounds already pretty investable as a business. The only thing that's missing is a way for investors to interact with the network. So that is why the structure that we designed has an extra element in it, which we are calling the operational collateral fund. This is essentially the entity that regulates the relationship between the network and the investor. They take the money from the investor and they use it to fund the operations of the network. And then they make sure that the profit shares that the revenue generating hubs are creating are also flowing back to those investors. So this is what we can do to make open source investable. So another slide I had talked a little bit more about the role of Powerhouse in all this. We have been a spin-off project at Sky that has been thinking about these things and working on these problems for quite a long time, and are this year starting to open up more to other projects as well. So if you're interested, get in touch. And later in the fall, we are targeting a release. So if you want to be part of the beta or one of the alpha releases, then you can reach out to us and we can make it happen. I hope that was interesting for you. So thanks for listening. And yeah, keep stealing capitalism from the gods. Thank you.